You want to know what betrayal looks like? It looks like your own brother slamming his fork down on the mahogany dinner table your grandmother left behind, the one she polished every Sunday after church, and announcing to a room full of vultures masquerading as family members, "Sold your little house for $300,000. The sound of that fork hitting the wood still echoes in my skull. Sharp. Final. Like a gunshot to everything I thought I knew about blood and loyalty. They clapped. Every single one of them clapped like trained seals at a circus, their hands coming together in this sick symphony of mockery while I sat there, frozen, watching the people who were supposed to love me celebrate my destruction. My cousin Sarah actually had the audacity to raise her wine glass and toast, finally making smart decisions, Helena. The wine was a cheap Merlot that tasted like regret and broken promises. I didn't say a word. Not one goddamn word. I just sat there, my hands folded in my lap like a good little girl, while they dissected my life and fed it back to me as entertainment. The silence I maintained that night would become my greatest weapon, but at that moment, it felt like I was drowning in my own throat. Then the phone rang. My brother Marcus answered it with that smug smile still plastered across his face, the same smile he wore when he used to steal my Halloween candy and tell me the tooth fairy was a lie. But that smile died faster than roadkill when the voice on the other end started screaming. Even from across the room, I could hear the panic bleeding through the speaker. "Why the hell are FBI agents at our office? What kind of property did you just sell us?" "My name is Helena. I'm 28 years old, and that was the day I realized that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers lurking in dark alleys or anonymous faces on the internet. It comes from the people who share your DNA, who sat at your Christmas table, who you trusted with your house keys and your heart. It comes from the people you love most, dressed up in Sunday clothes and fake smiles, ready to carve you up and serve you for dinner. Before I tell you how I made them all pay, I need to know something. Drop a comment below and tell me your country and what time it is right now where you're watching this. Whether it's sunrise painting the sky over London, midnight swallowing New York whole, afternoon heat beating down on Toronto, or evening settling over Sydney like a weighted blanket, I want to know. Don't just sit there like a ghost in your own life. Tell me where in the world you are, because this story is about being seen and heard when everyone tries to erase you. Now, let me tell you how I learned to use silence like a scalpel. I left that dinner table without a word, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor like fingernails on a chalkboard. The sound of their laughter followed me to the front door, bouncing off the walls of the house where I'd scraped my knees learning to ride a bike, where I'd hidden under blankets during thunderstorms, where I dreamed of a future that didn't include sleeping on someone else's couch because my own family had sold my home out from under me. The shame hit me like a freight train the moment I stepped outside. The October air was sharp and cruel, cutting through my sweater and settling into my bones. I could taste it on my tongue, metallic and bitter like blood and pennies. That's what humiliation tastes like when it's fresh and raw and delivered by the people who were supposed to protect you. The neighbors were already whispering. Mrs. Henderson from next door was pruning her roses with scissors that caught the porch light, but her eyes were trained on me like I was a specimen under a microscope. She let her brother sell her house. I heard her mutter to her husband through their screen door. How stupid can one person be? The words hit harder than any physical blow because they carried the weight of truth that I wasn't ready to face. I spent the next 3 weeks sleeping on my friend Rachel's couch, a piece of furniture that smelled like her cat and old takeout containers. The fabric was rough against my skin, scratching reminders into my back every night that I was displaced, unwanted, homeless because of my own blood. The thin blanket she gave me might as well have been made of sandpaper for all the comfort it provided. Every morning, I'd wake up to the smell of fried onions drifting from Rachel's kitchen, a scent that should have been comforting, but instead felt like an invasion. This wasn't my kitchen. These weren't my onions. This wasn't my life. I was a ghost haunting someone else's routine, apologizing for taking up space that wasn't mine to occupy. The guilt settled over me like a lead blanket, heavy and suffocating. How had I let it come to this? How had I been so naive, so trusting, so fucking stupid that I handed over the deed to my house to a man who shared my mother's eyes, but none of her heart? I'd replay that moment over and over, Marcus with his earnest expression, telling me it was just temporary, that he needed to handle some financial complications, that family helps family. The memory made my stomach turn like spoiled milk. If your own family has ever turned on you like a pack of wolves scenting blood, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't just sit there watching in silence like I did at that dinner table. And if you've been lucky enough to never feel the knife of family betrayal twisting in your back, then at least comment below and tell me why you still won't subscribe after hearing about this kind of pain. I dare you to justify your silence. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was stirring instant coffee in Rachel's kitchen, the spoon clinking against the ceramic mug like a broken bell. The voice on the other end was professional, clipped, and carried the kind of authority that makes your spine straighten involuntarily. Miss Helena Martinez? This is Agent Patricia Stone with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We need to discuss the property your brother recently sold on Maple Street. My hand froze mid-stir. The coffee grounds swirled in lazy circles, and for a moment, I wondered if I was still dreaming. But the voice continued, cutting through my disbelief like a blade through silk. The house in question isn't ordinary property, Ms. Martinez. It's under federal protection as part of a historical preservation district. The sale was not only unauthorized, it was illegal. I set the mug down with trembling fingers, the coffee sloshing over the rim and staining Rachel's counter. I don't understand, I whispered, though part of me was beginning to understand perfectly. Your brother had no legal right to sell that property. The buyers are in full panic mode, and our office has been fielding calls all morning. Federal authorities are circling, and subpoenas are being prepared as we speak. The room spun around me like a carnival ride operated by a drunk. My grandmother's house, the one with the wraparound porch and the garden where she taught me to grow tomatoes, was protected property. The deed that Marcus had convinced me to sign wasn't just a family favor, it was evidence in what was about to become a federal case. Within hours, my phone started buzzing with a different energy entirely. The same family members who had toasted my humiliation were now calling with voices pitched high with desperation. Marcus himself left 17 voicemails that Tuesday alone, his voice cracking like a pubescent boy as he begged me to call him back. Helena, you need to come fix this. The FBI showed up at my office. My office, Helena. People are staring at me like I'm some kind of criminal. You have to help me sort this out. We're family. Family. The word tasted like ash and broken glass. Imagine being laughed at one moment and begged for rescue the next. Subscribe if you believe karma always finds its way home, because what happened next will restore your faith in cosmic justice. I ignored every single call, every voicemail, every text message that lit up my phone like Christmas lights on a house that's about to foreclose. I sat in Rachel's living room, sipping my coffee while my phone vibrated against the coffee table like an angry insect trapped under glass, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: power. The voicemails piled up like dirty laundry. First came the begging. Helena, please, I know you're angry, but we need to talk about this. The FBI is asking questions I don't know how to answer. Then came the crying. I'm scared, Helena. I never meant for this to happen. I thought I was helping both of us. Finally came the cursing. Answer your goddamn phone. You're being selfish and vindictive, and you're going to ruin this entire family. The family group chat that had been silent for months suddenly exploded like a firework factory catching fire. Message after message flooded in, each one more desperate than the last. Helena, we know you're seeing these messages. You're ruining us. Answer the phone. This is bigger than your hurt feelings. Stop being a child and fix this mess. I screenshotted every single message and saved them to a folder I labeled Evidence of Character. My lawyer friend Jessica had given me one piece of advice that echoed in my mind like a prayer. Stay silent. Let them drown in their own mess. Sometimes the best revenge is just stepping out of the way and watching people destroy themselves. I spent the next 2 weeks in a state of zen-like calm, sipping coffee while my phone performed its desperate dance across various surfaces. I'd hold the device in my hand, feel it vibrate with another panicked call from Marcus, and simply set it back down. There's something intoxicating about refusing to be rescued when the same people who pushed you overboard are suddenly drowning and screaming for help. Sometimes silence is the loudest weapon you can wield. It cuts deeper than any argument, hits harder than any accusation, and leaves wounds that never quite heal. My silence became a statement. I am done being your solution. I am done being your safety net. I am done pretending that shared blood means shared loyalty. If you've ever been tempted to stay silent instead of arguing back, subscribe right now. Silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. It's the difference between reacting and responding, between being a victim and being the one holding all the cards. Comment strategy if you understand the power of saying nothing when everyone expects you to save them. The invitation came exactly 3 weeks after the FBI phone call. Marcus hand-delivered it himself, showing up at Rachel's apartment like a ghost from my past. His usual arrogance had been replaced by something that looked suspiciously like fear, his confidence hanging off him like an ill-fitting suit. "Helena," he said through Rachel's screen door, his voice softer than I'd heard it since we were children. "We're having a family reconciliation dinner. Friday night, 7 o'clock. We need to talk about everything." I stared at him through the mesh screen, noting how his hands shook slightly as he held the handwritten invitation. His hair was disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting anxiety. This was Marcus stripped of his swagger, reduced to begging on the doorstep of my temporary sanctuary. "Please," he added, and the word hung in the air between us like a white flag. "We're family, Helena. That has to count for something." I took the invitation without a word, felt the weight of the cardstock in my fingers, and closed the door. Through the window, I watched him stand there for a full minute, as if waiting for some sign of forgiveness or acknowledgement. When none came, he shuffled back to his car like a man walking to his execution. Friday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that makes you believe in fresh starts and second chances. I dressed carefully that evening, choosing a black dress that hugged my curves and heels that clicked against the pavement like a countdown timer. I wanted to look like success, like someone who had risen above their circumstances rather than someone who had been sleeping on a borrowed couch for a month. When I walked into my childhood home, a house that legally still belonged to me despite the fraudulent sale, the atmosphere was thick enough to cut with a knife. The dining room table was set with our grandmother's good china, the pieces that only came out for holidays and special occasions. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were using the dishes of a dead woman to serve up their desperation. The family was all there, arranged around the table like actors in a poorly rehearsed play. My parents sat at opposite ends, their faces wearing expressions of forced optimism. My cousin Sarah and David occupied the middle seats, their earlier smugness replaced by uncomfortable fidgeting. And Marcus sat in what used to be my father's chair, trying to project authority he no longer possessed. But I didn't take my usual seat. Instead, I walked to the head of the table, the spot traditionally reserved for the patriarch of the family, and sat down with the confidence of someone who finally understood their worth. The symbolism wasn't subtle, and judging by the collective intake of breath around the table, it wasn't lost on anyone. "Helena," my mother began, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was trying to manage a situation beyond her control. "We're so glad you came. We've missed you." I smiled without warmth, folding my hands in my lap like a queen holding court. "Have you? Is that why none of you called to check on me while I was homeless? Or were you too busy celebrating my brother's business acumen?" The silence that followed was pregnant with discomfort. Sarah shifted in her seat, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on her napkin. David cleared his throat like he was about to speak, then seemed to think better of it. My father stared at his empty wine glass as if it held the answers to questions he was afraid to ask. Would you have gone to that dinner? Would you have sat in that chair and faced the people who betrayed you, or would you have stayed away and let them wonder if you'd ever forgive them? Drop your answer below. And if you wouldn't have gone, then subscribe, because you already know this isn't a story about forgiveness. Marcus started with the soft approach, his voice carrying the practiced sincerity of a man who had spent weeks rehearsing his apology. Helena, what happened was a misunderstanding. A terrible, complicated misunderstanding. But we're family. We've always been family, and that means we work through problems together. He leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him like a penitent sinner. I never intended for things to go this far. When I sold the house, I thought I was helping both of us. The market was good, the buyers seemed legitimate, and I figured we could invest the money and both come out ahead. The lies rolled off his tongue like honey, sweet and cloying and completely artificial. I watched him perform his remorse, noting how he avoided direct eye contact, how his voice rose slightly when he claimed ignorance about the property's protected status. It was greed, I said, my voice cutting through his explanation like a sword through silk. And now it's not just a family squabble, it's a federal crime. The words hit the table like a bomb going off in slow motion. My mother's face went pale, her hand flying to her throat as if she was struggling to breathe. Sarah actually gasped out loud, the sound sharp and theatrical in the suddenly silent room. David knocked over his water glass, the liquid spreading across the white tablecloth like spilled blood. But Marcus just stared at me with the expression of a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. You sold what you didn't own, I continued, my voice steady and calm and absolutely merciless. You forged documents, misrepresented the property's status, and committed fraud against federal preservation laws. The FBI isn't knocking on my door asking questions, Marcus. They're at yours with handcuffs and subpoenas. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor with the same sound that had marked my exit from their last celebration. But this time, I wasn't running away in shame. I was walking away in triumph. The buyers are facing federal charges for purchasing protected property. Their lawyers are scrambling to distance themselves from the transaction. And you're going to learn what it feels like when the people you trust most decide you're not worth protecting. My heels clicked against the floor as I walked toward the door, each step echoing like a judge's gavel delivering a verdict. The sound would haunt that house long after I was gone, a reminder that justice sometimes wears designer shoes and speaks in the voice of the sister you betrayed. If this moment gave you chills, subscribe right now. And if you're sitting there refusing to hit that button, then at least comment and tell me why you won't, because I guarantee other viewers will call you out for choosing to stay silent when truth is being served. The news broke 3 days later like a dam bursting. Local man under FBI investigation over historical property fraud. The headline ran across the bottom of the evening news ticker, and suddenly Marcus wasn't just my brother anymore. He was a cautionary tale about greed and family betrayal served up for public consumption. I watched the coverage from Rachel's couch, a bowl of popcorn balanced on my lap like I was enjoying a particularly satisfying movie. The reporter stood outside Marcus's office building, her voice professional and detached as she detailed the charges: wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, violation of federal preservation laws, and falsification of legal documents. The dominoes fell faster than I could have imagined. Marcus's real estate license was suspended pending investigation. His business partners distanced themselves with the speed of people fleeing a burning building. The local paper ran a follow-up story about the historical significance of my grandmother's house, complete with photos of the wraparound porch and the garden where she'd taught me to distinguish between weeds and flowers. But the most satisfying part wasn't watching Marcus's professional life implode. It was watching the family dynamic shift like tectonic plates during an earthquake. The same people who had toasted his business acumen were now pointing fingers and assigning blame with the enthusiasm of sharks scenting blood in the water. "This is your fault," Sarah hissed at him during a confrontation that played out on my parents' front lawn, loud enough for the neighbors to hear every word. "You told us this was a smart investment. You said Helena was being stubborn and emotional. You were the one who pushed her to sign the papers," David shot back, his voice carrying across the yard like a town crier announcing a scandal. "You kept saying she was being selfish for holding on to that old house." My parents, meanwhile, tried to play the role of neutral peacekeepers while privately panicking about their own potential legal exposure. Had they encouraged the sale? Had they known about the property's protected status? The questions multiplied like bacteria in a petri dish, spreading doubt and suspicion through every family interaction. The neighbors who had once whispered about my stupidity were now gossiping about Marcus's criminality. Mrs. Henderson pruned her roses with renewed vigor, her scissors snipping away while she provided running commentary to anyone within earshot. "I always knew that boy was too slick for his own good," she announced to the mailman. "The way he drove up to that house in his fancy car, acting like he owned the place. Well, turns out he didn't own anything at all. I drove by the house, my house, exactly 1 week after the news broke." The for sale sign had been replaced with something far more ominous, a notice from the federal government declaring the property under investigation and warning against any further transactions. Yellow tape fluttered from the porch railings like warnings flags on a ship lost at sea. Marcus's car wasn't in the driveway. According to my sources, also known as Rachel's impressive neighborhood gossip network, he'd moved in with my parents after his landlord evicted him for the negative publicity. The man who had sold my house was now homeless himself, sleeping in the childhood bedroom where he'd once planned his conquest of the adult world. The poetry of it was almost too perfect to be real. Cameras followed him wherever he went now. Not paparazzi, Marcus wasn't famous enough for that level of attention, but local news crews hungry for any development in the story. I watched him hurry from his car to my parents' front door, his head down and his shoulders hunched like a man trying to make himself invisible. The confident swagger that had once defined him was gone, replaced by the furtive movements of someone who understood that he was being watched and judged and found wanting. His lawyer, a tired-looking man in an expensive suit that couldn't hide his exhaustion, made statements to the press about misunderstandings and good faith efforts and the presumption of innocence. But even he seemed to know he was fighting a losing battle. The evidence was clear, the law was unambiguous, and public opinion had already rendered its verdict. Do you believe in poetic justice? Do you believe that the universe sometimes corrects its own imbalances, that the people who wrong others eventually face consequences that fit their crimes? If yes, subscribe. If not, tell me in the comments, because I want to see who doesn't believe villains should pay for their choices. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with wood paneling that had probably been installed sometime in the 1960s and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly jaundiced. I sat in the back row, dressed in navy blue like I was attending a funeral, which, in many ways, I was. Judge Patricia Williams was a woman in her late 50s with silver hair and the kind of piercing gaze that suggested she'd heard every excuse and justification known to humanity. She reviewed the case files with the methodical precision of someone who understood that her words would determine the trajectory of multiple lives. Marcus sat at the defendant's table with his lawyer, his hands folded in his lap and his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. He'd lost weight in the months since his arrest, his cheekbones more prominent and his expensive suit hanging loose on his diminished frame. This wasn't the man who had slammed his fork on the dinner table and announced my humiliation to a room full of enablers. This was someone smaller, diminished, reduced to hoping for mercy from a system that dealt in facts rather than family loyalty. The prosecutor was a compact woman with red hair who laid out the case with the precision of a surgeon. She detailed Marcus's actions step by step, the forged documents, the false representations to the buyers, the complete disregard for federal preservation laws that protected properties like my grandmother's house. She presented evidence like a master chef preparing a meal, each piece building on the last until the full scope of Marcus's fraud was laid bare for everyone to see. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty, "the defendant didn't stumble into this situation through ignorance or misunderstanding. He researched the property, knew about its protected status, and chose to proceed anyway because he believed he could profit from breaking federal law." Marcus's lawyer tried to mount a defense built on good intentions and family complications, but even his arguments sounded hollow in that sterile courtroom air. He painted Marcus as a man trying to help his sister, someone who had made an honest mistake while navigating complex property laws. Judge Williams listened to everything with the patience of someone who had presided over hundreds of similar cases. When the arguments concluded, she removed her glasses and cleaned them slowly, the only sound in the courtroom the whisper of cloth against lens. "Ignorance of the law is no excuse," she said finally, her voice carrying the authority of decades on the bench. "But this case goes beyond ignorance. The evidence shows deliberate deception, calculated fraud, and a complete disregard for the federal laws designed to protect our historical heritage." The sentence came down like thunder: 5 years in federal prison, restitution to the buyers, and permanent prohibition from engaging in any real estate transactions. The gavel hit the bench with the finality of a coffin lid closing, and Marcus's head dropped as if the weight of his choices had finally become too heavy to bear. I watched him led away in handcuffs, his lawyer whispering what I assumed were words of comfort or next steps or appeals processes. But none of that mattered anymore. The man who had betrayed my trust, sold my inheritance, and celebrated my humiliation was now property of the federal prison system. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel the rush of vindictive satisfaction that I'd expected. Instead, I felt something quieter and more profound, the settling of cosmic balance, the restoration of order to a universe that had briefly tilted off its axis. If you were standing in that courtroom, watching someone who had wronged you face the consequences of their choices, would you have smiled or maintained your dignity in silence? Comment below. I need to know how you would have handled that moment of ultimate vindication. I walked out of that courthouse into bright autumn sunlight that felt like a benediction. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and new possibilities. For the first time in months, I could breathe without feeling like my lungs were full of broken glass. The courthouse steps stretched out before me like a pathway to somewhere new, somewhere better, somewhere that didn't carry the weight of family betrayal and stolen dreams. I paused at the top, looking out at a world that suddenly seemed full of potential rather than obstacles. They called me foolish. They mocked my trust, my loyalty, my belief that family meant something more than shared DNA and holiday dinners. They toasted my humiliation like it was champagne at a wedding, celebrating the moment when my naive faith in blood bonds finally cracked under the weight of their greed. And now? Now they beg for mercy I'll never give. Now they understand that the quiet sister they dismissed and discounted was the one holding all the cards. Now they know that sometimes the person you underestimate is the one who destroys you. They called me a stranger at that dinner table, remember? They treated me like an outsider in my own family, someone whose feelings and future were less important than their entertainment and my brother's profit margins. Well, they were right about one thing. I am a stranger now. But not because they pushed me out. I'm a stranger by choice because I finally learned the difference between family and people who happen to share your last name. My grandmother used to tell me that the strongest trees grow in the harshest soil. She'd say it while we worked in her garden, her weathered hands gentle as she taught me to nurture things that would outlast us both. I never understood what she meant until I found myself sleeping on a stranger's couch, betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect me, forced to choose between forgiveness and justice. I chose justice. I chose silence over reconciliation. I chose to let them drown in the consequences of their own choices rather than throw them a lifeline made of my own diminished dignity. The house, my grandmother's house, was returned to me 6 months later, along with a formal apology from the federal government for the disruption to my life. The buyer's legal fees, the investigation costs, the media circus that had turned my family name into a cautionary tale, none of that was my responsibility. I was the victim, they reminded me. I was the one who had been wronged. But I didn't feel like a victim anymore. Victims are powerless, reactive, defined by what others do to them. I felt like someone who had learned to use the system's own weight against itself, someone who had discovered that patience and silence could be more devastating than any argument or confrontation. The family still calls sometimes. Holidays approach, and my mother's number appears on my phone, the device vibrating with the desperate hope that enough time has passed for forgiveness to feel possible. I listen to the voicemails sometimes, hearing the familiar voices that once filled my childhood with laughter and love, now reduced to pleading for a reconciliation that will never come. Marcus writes letters from federal prison. They arrive in my mailbox like ghosts from a past I've abandoned, his handwriting smaller and more careful than I remember. Rachel brings them to me unopened, her eyebrows raised in question, but I drop them in the trash without breaking the seal. Some bridges, once burned, should stay ash and memory. I rebuilt my life from the ground up, starting with the foundation of self-respect and adding layers of independence, success, and carefully chosen relationships. The people in my life now are there because they've proven their loyalty through actions rather than accidents of birth. They've earned their place at my table through consistency, honesty, and the radical act of treating me like someone whose feelings matter. The house is beautiful now, restored to my grandmother's original vision with modern updates that honor her memory while serving my needs. I've planted new flowers in her garden, varieties she would have loved, and I tend them with the same careful attention she taught me. But now I understand that some things grow best when you remove the weeds that choke them, even when those weeds share your root system. People ask me sometimes if I regret it, if I miss them, if the victory was worth the loss of family. They ask as if justice and family love are mutually exclusive, as if choosing to protect yourself means abandoning all hope of human connection. But here's what they don't understand. I didn't lose a family. I shed a burden. I didn't sacrifice love. I learned to recognize its counterfeit. I didn't choose loneliness. I chose quality over quantity, authenticity over obligation, respect over reconciliation. What would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven and forgotten, embraced the family that betrayed you, chosen peace over justice? Or would you have done what I did, let them face the consequences of their choices while you rebuilt your life on the foundation of your own worth? Drop your answer below. Tell me if you think I was right or wrong, if you would have chosen differently, if you believe families should get unlimited chances to hurt the people they claim to love. And if you've listened to this entire story without subscribing, ask yourself this: why are you turning away when justice is being served? Why choose silence when someone is standing up for themselves? Why refuse to support someone who learned to value themselves enough to walk away from people who didn't? The subscription button is right there. The choice is yours. But remember, every choice you make says something about who you are and what you believe. So what will it be?